So there were two big ideas that were shared as of late, just to recap very quickly. And that is that, number one, teshuvah begins right here, begins with the thought process. The second, we have what is called hirur teshuvah, a thought of teshuvah, a thought of repentance, and the recognition that we need to change direction from east to west, as the example that we brought in previous classes. Then that in and of itself constitutes teshuvah. That in and of itself is not just a starting point, but it is teshuvah in and of itself, because teshuvah has to happen here, and hopefully then the rest of the body or the rest of the psyche will be influenced by what occurs right here. And we define a person in the context of teshuvah by what he thinks in here, because that's really where teshuvah happens. That's one big concept, and we spoke a lot about that. The second big concept is that it's a gradual work, that we can never think that we've arrived. As Rabbi Steinsaltz points out, that if you think you've arrived, you're lost. It's true for life, and it's true in general for teshuvah also, that if you think you've arrived, then you're really lost. That's why I've never been fond of the term Baal Teshuvah, which is really a term that is used for people who do teshuvah and become observant and so on and so forth, because Baal Teshuvah means the master of teshuvah. Really, you can never be a master of teshuvah. You have to recognize that there's always room to grow. There's always progress to be made. The second you think, oh, I've mastered it, that's it, I have nothing, I don't have anything to do anymore, that's when you start digressing, and that's when you start doing the opposite of teshuvah. So that's the other big thought. By the way, what we ought to, the Jewish term that we ought to think of in the context of teshuvah is the term that, by the way, the Greeks stole from us. And that's the term of Talmid Chacham. We call our sages a student of wisdom, right? That's what Talmid Chacham means. Talmidei Chachamim, students of wisdom. Talmid means student, Chacham means wisdom. That's because a sage par excellence is a sage that always recognizes that there's so much to learn, that he's but a student. He's a student of that ultimate wisdom. He's never a wise man. He's never a Chacham. He's never a master or Baal Chacham, as we say, Baal Teshuvah. No, he's always forever a student. Why am I saying that the Greeks stole that from us? It's just interesting to note. Because how do the Greeks call their sages? What's the word used even in English? Philosopher, right? Philosophers. Now, philosopher is really a combination of two Greek words. Philo means love, and Sofer comes from the word Sophia, which means wisdom, lovers of wisdom. Now, it's not as accurate as ours, students of wisdom, but they also recognize that they cannot attain wisdom. That if you think you've attained wisdom, that's when you're dumb. They also recognize that you constantly have to yearn for wisdom, like a student who yearns for wisdom, or like a lover of wisdom who learns to connect to wisdom. But that's the idea also found in teshuvah, particularly in teshuvah, because teshuvah is an ongoing process, and that's why, in a way, it doesn't really matter how different we are in our observance, because at the end of the day, we're in the same journey. I'm growing, you're growing. Whether I have 1,000 mitzvahs under my belt or just 100, doesn't matter. As long as you're growing, then you are personifying teshuvah. That's really the big idea. And by the way, it's based on the reality that, on pure reality, that we are finite beings. God is infinite. And a finite being versus the infinite, no matter how great that finite being is, has an infinite journey. And you could have a shoemaker or an astrophysicist. It doesn't matter. Their journey is as equally infinite as could be. Because, again, we're speaking about God, and therefore this teshuvah can never really be mastered. Okay, so those were the two big ideas spoken of up until this stage here in the book. The 13 Petalled Rose is mentioned 98 in this edition, middle of the page. Let's continue a little bit more. Does anyone want to read? Jewish thought pays little attention. Does anyone want to read?
I can read.
Please, Vicky, go for it, please. Yeah.
Jewish thought pays little attention to inner tranquility and peace of mind. The feeling, behold, I've arrived, could well the capacity to continue, suggesting as it does that the infinite can be reached in a finite number of steps. In fact, the very concept of the divine as infinite implies an activity that is endless, of which one must never grow weary. At every rung of this ascent, the penitent, like any person who follows the way of God, perceives mainly the remoteness. Only in looking back can one obtain some idea of the distance already covered, of the degree of progress. Repentance, do you want me to continue or do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
a little
this?
bit more. There's so much
Okay.
to say, but go ahead.
Repentance does not bring a sense of serenity or of completion, but stimulates a reaching out in further effort. Indeed, the power and the potential of repentance lie in increased incentive and enhanced capacity to follow the path even further. The response is often no more than an assurance that one is in fact capable of repenting, and its efficacy lies in the growing awareness with time that one is indeed progressing on the right path.
Right.
In this manner, the conditions are created in which repentance is no longer an isolated act, but has become a permanent possibility, a constant progress of going forward. It is a going that is both the rejection of what was once axiomatic and an acceptance of new goals.
Right. This is such a powerful idea, and an idea that really Rabbi Steinsaltz lived to the T. Just two stories come to mind, and then we can develop this idea a little bit. Two stories involving Rabbi Steinsaltz himself. One story is, I remember that he was on a panel in New York City with some other thought leaders. David Brooks was one of them, and some others. And he was asked, Rabbi Steinsaltz, what do you think of progressive Judaism? You know, there's that concept of progressive Judaism these days. People who are, trying to adapt to modern times and maybe change things for modernism, whatever it may be. And Rabbi Steinsaltz's answer is, of course, out of the box and so innovative and brilliant. And he says, I'm all for progress. Progressive Judaism, I'm all for progress. The question is in which direction? That's the question. Which direction are you progressing? Because some people, as he said, can be progressing backwards. So then what is that progress worth altogether? Not much. And in a way, this is what he's saying right here, that we are all for progress. Judaism is for progress. Not only that, it demands that a person progresses, that we grow each and every day. That, as Rabbi Steinsaltz would put it, that today has to be better than yesterday and far worse than tomorrow. Every day should be a better day, a stronger day, a day in which we've grown more than we did yesterday. But the question is in which direction? That's the question. That's number one. A second story, Rabbi Steinsaltz, again, then we can develop this idea, which also epitomizes this idea. And that is that he was on a panel. I wasn't there, but I heard this directly from Rabbi Steinsaltz. He told me the story. But he was on a panel in Spain. It was an interfaith panel, and there was him representing Judaism, and there was an imam representing Islam, and there was a priest representing Christianity. And they were asked, what is the idea of the afterlife in your faith? So the imam said what it was in the Islamic faith, and the priest in Christianity, and then Rabbi Steinsaltz had to speak about what the afterlife looks like in Judaism. And he said that the way, of course, I'm giving you the condensed answer, but the way the afterlife looks like in Judaism is that the soul constantly ascends from one level to another. It not only studies and basks in God's light, but also it yearns constantly like a soul, which is, remember, like a candle of fire, like a candle of God, like a fire itself, constantly wants to grow from one level to another level to another level, deeper and deeper, further and further in its connection, and it's an understanding. It's restless. At the end of his presentation, a woman stood up and asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, I loved the Christianity answer about the afterlife. I love the Islamic answer about the afterlife. Both offer comforts and rewards. But why would I want to be Jewish if Judaism doesn't give me rest, even after I die? If the soul constantly yearns from strength to strength, as we say, Michael El Chai, then you guys have it really, really difficult. And Rabbi Steinsaltz responded so brilliantly. He said, look, there's two types of pleasures in this world. There's a pleasure in which I tell someone, look, There's a very comfortable couch. Here's a delicious ice cream. Sit, relax, and enjoy this ice cream. That's one pleasure. Another type of pleasure is where I show a person a mountain and I say, you see this mountain? And I climb it. After you've reached the peak, I have an even higher mountain for you to climb. Then I'm going to ask you to climb that. Some people find tremendous pleasure in that second type of pleasure. And he responded to this woman, you see, we Jews are mountain climbers. That's what we do. We don't rest. We don't find pleasure in tranquility and in serenity. We find pleasure in growth, in that constant progress upward. That's what we find pleasure in. So it's two stories in which Rabbi Steinsaltz again emphasized the point that he writes about right here. And that is that Judaism has never been big about peace of mind and what does he say, inner tranquility, but rather we've always demanded growth from ourselves and from others. And in a way, I think that's part of the secret of Jewish success everywhere. I mean, think about this. You know, at every Passover Seder, you have that uncle who has to point out how many Jews there are in the Nobel Prize list. Wow, look at us. We're so brilliant and we're so great and we contribute so much to society. Yes, it's true. You ask yourself, where's that from? It's from this idea that's infused in us that we have to grow. No matter where we are, who we are, we have to grow. I want to open this up. Again, comments, questions, disagreements. I want to develop this idea in one more direction. But does anyone have anything to say? No one? Okay. So anything?
I hit the wrong button.
Okay. Yes, please, Mark. Yeah.
I remember a story comparing Eastern religions to Western religions.
Yeah.
And Alexander the Great epitomizes the Western philosophy, where you have to achieve all that you need to achieve in society today, during your lifetime here. It's because of reincarnation and the afterlife that the Eastern religions, and I guess in this case, Judaism falls under an Eastern philosophy because of reincarnation. There is a belief that you don't have to achieve everything here in this lifetime. There's always an opportunity to come back and continue to grow and grow and grow. And so it's a perpetual growth issue. And I just lay that out in terms of East versus West. But I don't know where Judaism, I mean, is Judaism in that context an Eastern?
But in that context, it's funny because I think it merges the two, the Eastern and the Western, in many ways. But in that context, certainly, we are more like the Eastern religions than the Western one, in which we believe that we are reincarnated, and not just a reincarnation, but as mentioned, in the heavens themselves, we are constantly striving to grow and grow and grow. And in this world, of course, also. That's right. So in that context, we are very much like the Eastern religion. Even though some Eastern religions would, I think, set the goal of tranquility as a goal in and of itself. We don't believe in tranquility. You know, the Talmud famously says, "Tzadikim en lehem menucha lo ba'olam hazeh v'lo ba'olam haba," that the righteous have no rest, not in this world and not in the world to come. They have no rest. I mean, I feel sorry for them, but in a way, and that's the other direction I wanted to go in. But I think in a way, it really is not just the key to growth, but it's the key to life. This sense of restlessness. Why am I saying that this is the key to life? So put it in an educational context. I think when you tell your children, go and rest, go and take a break, you can do that from time to time. Sometimes, trust me, I have 9 of them. They need a break from each other mainly, and they need a break in general and need to rest. But if that becomes a motto, that becomes a constant thing, I think what we're doing by saying that, or by asking them to rest and by asking them to achieve tranquility and achieve peace and serenity, or whatever word we may use, that we are really paralyzing them. I know it's a hard word, but we're paralyzing them, their potential, their growth, maybe even their mission in this world. What we do tell our children is that, no, you have to be the best you can, the best you can be. You have to do the best. You have to work your hardest. There's a book written by two Christian teens. I think it's called Try Harder. Try Harder. It's a great book. I mean, it's, again, a Christian book, but it's a great book. I remember reading it a long time ago. I'm just Googling the, Do Hard Things. This is what the book is called. Do Hard Things, a Teenage Rebellion Against Low Expectations. Mm-hmm. And it's really basically two teenagers, two brothers. Let me see, Harris brothers. There we go, Alex and Brett Harris, who are rebelling against this new trend in education where teachers say, no, you don't have to work. So, I'm so sorry. I got you out of your comfort zone. Oh, no, go, take a nice little chill and whatever. No, teenagers inside of them want to work hard. Children want to work hard. They want to progress. Why? Because when we ask our children to work hard and progress, the message that is coming through is that we are believing in them. We are believing in their potential. Because they have such high potential, they need to work hard in order to actualize it. When we say to our children, no, don't work so hard and everything, the message that can directly, indirectly, consciously or subconsciously go through is that, you know what, you have such small potential, we don't really believe in you, so just go back to your bed and sleep. That's the message. You know, I often say, and I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong, psychologically, I don't know, but my instinct tells me that one of the reasons that Americans remember this line, even though it's not such a brilliant line, more than any other line, the line of John F. Kennedy on January 22nd, 1961, during his presidential inauguration, in which he said, ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country, right? A famous line. Why is it that we remember this line? Why is it that it's being engraved in our consciousness? And that's because John F. Kennedy did what Rabbi Steinsaltz is writing just here. And that is, he spoke to the full potential in people. He said, I believe in you. And therefore you ought to do something for your country. Now, when you speak to people's high potentials, they respond. Something in them responds. And it brings out the best in people. That's what Judaism does. Judaism does not believe in tranquility or in serenity because we're against it. We're not against tranquility or serenity, but rather we don't believe in tranquility and serenity because we believe so much in people. We believe so much in that divine soul. We believe so much in that infinite potential. And therefore, to actualize it, all we ought to do is grow and grow and grow, and work harder and harder and harder. You know, it's interesting, but Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Kabbalah, one of the Hasidic masters and one of the great Kabbalists of 250 years ago, that's his take on the last speech of Moses to the Jewish people. You know, it's become a trend among university professors to give the last lecture. In fact, not too long ago, Randy Posh, a professor in 2007 was diagnosed with terminal cancer. You remember that YouTube of his last lecture? And he gave his last lecture that made lives and
Carnegie Mellon.
That's right. And about life in general, and how the doctors told him that he has 6 months to live. Eventually, I think he outlived them and lived for another year and a half or something like that. But the last lecture of Moses was Ha'azinu Hashamayim va'adaberav tishma ha'aretz imrei fi. What does this mean? Listen, O heaven, and I will speak, and the land will hear my words. Now, he's not even addressing the people. Imagine, you're a leader of a nation that has led them through thick and thin for 40 years in the desert. Now you have the opportunity that they know that you're dying. They know that this is your last lecture, and you don't even address them. You don't address them. Who do you address? The heaven and the earth. What type of a leader is that? What type of a speech is that? What type of a last lecture is that? Hazino Shamayim, speak to your people. They're dying to hear something. They know that you're about to die. Tell them something. But what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak points out is just that. No, he was speaking to his people. But he was speaking to the heavenly people. He was telling them, look, in you have a heaven and earth. We have the things that pull us up, and you have the things that pull you down towards rest, towards serenity, towards tranquility, towards inactivity, passivity. And you have things that pull you up, that towards action, towards change, towards proactivism, towards bettering the world, towards bettering ourselves. That's the heaven. Things that pull you down on the earth. I want to speak to the heavens. Moses starts his speech saying, no, I'm speaking to your heavens. And I hope that you'll respond in a heavenly way, because I believe in you. Moses was forever demanding of his people. He took a nation of slaves that suffered from the Stockholm syndrome, that was as cranky as it gets. And as you know, all the Jewish Yiddish proverbs existed in that nation. They kracht, and they kvetched, and they schlepped, and they whatever it is. But Moses believed in that. That's what made him the greatest leader. And I think that's what makes Judaism so special too. Speaks to the best in people. And this is exactly what Rabbi Steinsaltz. It's not because we don't believe in serenity again, but the point is because we believe so much in people that we can't just let them go. We can't let them just retreat. And when you speak to the best in people, then they respond in that way. Anyhow, so this is really the idea of teshuvah, that it's a never-ending work, it's a never-ending progress in the right direction, not in the wrong direction, in the right direction, forward and upward. And it's an ongoing and eternal task. So that's the idea. Again, I want to open this up. I feel like I'm monologuing.
When can you rest? Rabbi, when can you rest?
So, yeah, I'm going to quote Rabbi Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz, you know, the famous Jewish proverb is that you rest in the grave, right? That's what the Jewish mothers would tell you. When can you rest? You'll rest in your grave. But he would put a nice spin on it. Rabbi Steinsaltz told me that a few times. He said, well, this idea is that God allocated time for everything in this world. In fact, it's a very Talmudic idea. The Talmud says that on Rosh Hashanah, God allocates how much time you'll dedicate to your activities in life, how much time you'll dedicate to work, how much time you'll dedicate to family, etc. So it's true for life in general. God allocated time to all sorts of activities. The time for sleep, for rest, he allocated to the grave. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says, if you're going to use that time up in this world, what are you going to do in the grave? You'll go crazy. You'll have used it already. So what are you going to do in the grave? But that's a nice little humorous spin of Rabbi Steinsaltz himself. But so when do you rest in the grave? But again, the righteous don't rest, not in this world and not in the world to come. Maybe the body rests in the grave, but not the soul. Yeah. I mean, look, I'll say this. There's a verse that we say every day that comes from Ezekiel, I think. And that's V'kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. There is no concept of rest, but there is a concept of renewal of strength. That the hopers of God, those who hope for God, will renew this strength. That's what the verse says. Kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. By the way, I remember visiting a jail in Atlanta, the DeKalb County Jail. And, you know, the concept of jail is not a Jewish concept. That's a discussion for a different time. We don't really believe in jails. The concept of jail does not exist in the Torah. The only time we find the concept of prison is in Egypt, where Joseph was thrown in prison, but that's an Egyptian concept, not a Jewish concept. We believe in either in punishment, in death sentence, we do believe in that. Of course, in a very different process that the American law presents. Again, it's a different discussion, different times. But we don't believe in jail, but it's a very, you know, Atlanta is in the Bible Belt. So, of course, everything needs to have some justification biblically. So what is the jail going to say? There's no basis for it in the Torah, in the Bible. So what they did is that they took this verse and they adorned the jail with it, at least the entrance of the jail. I remember it made an impact on me. I entered DeKalb County Jail in Atlanta, and there you see this verse, the Kovei Hashem yachalifu koach, and instead of saying those who hope for God will renew their strength, which is the accurate translation, they translated it as those who will wait for God, as if prison is a time to wait, and then God will come through. So someone mistranslated this verse in order to justify prison. But to go back, we don't believe in rest, but we do believe in the renewal of strength. And if rest is an ingredient for the renewal of strength, then fine, let it be. But rest as a goal in of itself, we don't believe in. Rest has to be a part of this progress, of this journey onwards. It's there to help us continue to grow.
That may be why we have COVID. It is forcing us to take a break and to renew.
Right.
If 1 month, I'm okay. 7 months, I'm not there.
Right. But yes, but even within the rest, there must be some activity too. You know that, let's go to another Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for rest is menucha. Actually, it's interesting because this week's portion is Noach. Noach is the, you know, we all know Noah he was the one who was asked to build the ark and save humanity from a flood. Eventually only saved himself and his family. Built this ark and eventually had to rebuild the world by himself with his family, which he did. But the word for rest again is menucha. Now what's interesting is that in menucha you also have another word which applies just that, implies that rest cannot just be rest. What's the other word in menucha? I know we have some Hebrew speaking people here. Anyone?
Well, it's part of the midot. There's a second word, menucha something, is a midot.
Right. But the
equanimity.
Right. Okay. So menucha midot, maybe the mem, yeah. But anyone else? And then I'll say it.
Menucha hanefesh is the word for tranquility, the translation.
Right.
The midah.
Right. And that's right.
Is the shorish, does it have something to do with nach or something that continues with a noon?
That's right. The shorish is a nun chet, hey. And by the way, it's the same word for comfort, right? Comfort applies some type of bodily rest, maybe, because noach is the Hebrew word for comfort, noachli. So menucha, the Kabbalists teach that menucha actually comes from the word manoach. Manoach is a name. Manoach was a biblical figure. Manoach was a man who could not have children, and eventually he was given a blessing, but he was a man who lived a very restless life. And the story of Manoach is a story that's fascinating in and of itself, but he lived a very restless life. Now, why would he have the name Manoach? Why would it have the name rest when his life implies the opposite of it? There's many answers to that. Is the Kabbalistic answer that the name that you have has a hint to the mission that you have in this world. His name was rest, and maybe his restlessness was his way of actualizing that ultimate rest. Through restlessness you can find rest, but it shares the same idea that in every rest there should be restlessness, in every restlessness there should be rest. That's the oxymoron that is very often found in Judaism, that even in rest we cannot rest. Even in rest we have to have this manoach, this type of life that is restless. And when we are restless, even in that restlessness, we can't get caught up with the restlessness because it can become very frustrating, and we have to find some level of serenity and rest, even within the restlessness. I think the way to achieve that is through this trust that we must have, that God is with us, and that things that we can't figure out in this restlessness mode, we give it over to the higher power, as the AA program says, the 12-step program. Give it over to God. So even in the restlessness, we have to have rest. Even in the rest, we have to have a manoach type of living, some type of restlessness. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Avorke, who was the great-great-grandfather of Rabbi Steinsaltz, He was in and of himself a brilliant Hasidic master. Rabbi Yitzchak Avorke used to say, what is a Jew? Not halachically speaking, but just essentially speaking, what is a Jew? And he would answer, and I hope I'm quoting accurately, he would answer that a Jew is a person who could be sitting still, yet dancing his heart out. He could be among thousands, yet still very lonely. He could be silent, yes, yet screaming so loudly. And he could be resting, yet as restless as could be, something like that. But that's the oxymoron or the dichotomy of a Jew's rest. So that's how we can rest, not just when we can rest, but also how we can rest. Yes, yes, Heidi, yes, I see you.
Yeah, and this may be on a personal note about you, but given what you just said about the dichotomy, how do you handle when, in the example, when you went into the jail and you knew that wasn't translated correctly? Do you say anything? You have so much wisdom to share. How do you decide when your voice might be screaming, that's wrong, no, that's not correct?
Right.
When you know when to say, when to teach, when not?
Right.
How do you do that?
So if we want to go, I mean, it's a boring story, but I'll share it anyway, and I'll tell you I addressed it. I don't know if it's the ideal way to address it, but yes, when it bothers me and I can address it, then you have to address it. I think everyone has to address something that bothers them if it can be well received. Right. You know, Maimonides says, just as it is a mitzvah to say things that are heard, so too it is a mitzvah not to say things that are not heard. Sometimes you have to remain silent, but if you have the opportunity to say something and to make a difference, then you should say it. So I was actually greeted by the warden of the jail. It's a massive jail, massive. It's like a city in of its own. 3,600 inmates, and it has 8 floors, and the 8th floor is a maximum security floor. And that's where we were headed to. I was there with the Israeli consul or the vice consul, and he gave us a tour. And as he gave us the tour, I didn't address the mistranslation, but I did ask the question, because that's the purpose of it. What is done for the what are you doing for the inmates to be able to rehabilitate themselves? Are they just waiting? That was the word used. Are they just waiting for freedom? Or are they doing anything while they're waiting to rehabilitate themselves? Because I think that's what really every prison should be doing. It's fascinating, but you know, I learned this from that very warden. He told me that inmates that are in jail for more than 3 years, they have something like 60% chance of returning to jail. More than 5 years, it goes up to 70% chance, something like that, of returning to jail. Why? Because they are not being changed in jail. I mean, so they perform the crime, then educate them, then change them, provide some rehabilitation for them. But if they're just going to be staring at walls and fighting with each other while they're in jail, then what's the purpose? So that's what led me to asking this question, but that's how I addressed waiting. So I didn't address the mistranslation, but I addressed the idea itself. I think that's what we ought to do. By the way, I'm still trying to figure this out, but this has nothing to do with 13 Petalled Rose, so let's be very quick about this. But I asked him, what's your busiest night? You check in so many prisoners, you have 3,600 prisoners here. And I told him, that's 100 times, you know, I told him about the high number. So it's, what is it? 200 times high. But I asked him, what's your busiest night? I would think that he would have said Friday night, right? Or Saturday night when people go out and go wild. What do you think he said? He said Wednesday night. Wednesday night is the busiest night. Why? My theory is exactly what we're speaking about, so it is connected to the 13 Petalled Rose, is that I think that more than going out and becoming wild, what makes people do criminal things or things that are opposite their true selves is boredom. There's nothing worse than boredom. Wednesday night, it's not the beginning of the week, so you don't have the busyness of the beginning of the week. It's not the end of the week. It's the middle of the week, you start getting bored. So you start doing stupid things. Now, I may be completely wrong, but it certainly addresses this point that restlessness, comfort, tranquility really breed terrible things. Breed boredom. Boredom eventually breeds terrible things. Why? Because in the human condition, we have this restlessness. We have the soul that doesn't want to rest. Anyhow.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other comment before we can continue a little bit more? Question, disagreement. Okay. All right. Let's go to page 99 here, at least in this edition. Continue a little bit more. Does anyone want to continue to read?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Please,
Okay.
Gila, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
The paths of the penitent and of the man who has merely lost his direction differ only in terms of the aim, not in going itself. The Jewish approach to life considers the man who has stopped going, he who has a feeling of completion, of peace, of a great light from above that has brought him to rest, to be someone who has lost his way. Only he whom the light continues to beckon, for whom the light is as distant as ever, only he can be considered to have received some sort of response. The path a man has taken is revealed to him only in retrospect, in a contemplation of the past that grants confidence in what lies ahead. This awareness is in fact the reward, and it is conditional on the continuation of the return.
Right. Again, there's so much in here. So I just, what comes to mind, you know, when Rabbi Steinsaltz speaks about here, the Jewish approach to life considers the man who has stopped going to be someone who has lost his way. It reminds me of the word for life in Hebrew, going back to the Hebrew language, but if this is the Jewish approach to life, so I think it's very appropriate. The word for life in Hebrew is chaim. It's interesting because that's one of the only words that are also mistranslated. Because the word for life doesn't mean, the word chaim doesn't mean life. The word chaim means lives. There is no word for one life in Hebrew. There's no word for one life. Chai is the verb, not the noun. Word for life is lives. Why is that? Because we recognize, the divine language recognizes that one is only truly alive if I've impacted other lives. If I've influenced people positively, and I constantly I'm in that mode of going out of myself and touching more and more and more people, then I'm alive. My life has encompassed other lives, then I'm chaim. If I live selfishly just for myself, internally, for my rest, for my tranquility, for my peace of mind, I really haven't lived. There is no word for me in the Hebrew language, for my life at least. So when Rabbi Steinsaltz speaks about here the Jewish approach to life, I'm sure he's saying that again, that's the approach. The word for life teaches you what the approach is. And that is that your life is to encompass other lives and has to constantly work to come out of yourself and reach others and touch them more and more each and every day. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this paragraph is at the very end here, this awareness is in fact the reward and is conditional at the continuation of the return. Or let's start a little bit before. The path of man is taken is revealed to him only in retrospect, in a contemplation of the past that grants confidence in what lies ahead. And that sometimes that it is, you know, speaking of renewal of strength. So sometimes it is worthwhile to take a little pause and look back and say, okay, I've been working so much. Let's see what has been produced. You look back and you're at awe at what has been produced. And you say to yourself, okay, maybe I didn't see that in the day-to-day work, but taking a moment to look at it after a while really gives us this renewed strength to continue to walk forward. I think that you know, it's interesting that that's the way God created the world. You can't build buildings in one shot. You can't build pyramids with just a click of the hand. It's got to be brick after brick after brick. Same with life. You can't build life in one shot. I know that we're all about instant gratification these days, but it doesn't exist. The only way we can build life is one brick after another brick after another brick after another brick. Sometimes we have to stop and say, oh, let me see how many bricks. And then, wow, I don't know. I didn't see that image. But that's what can give us really so much strength. You know, there's the Midrash that speaks about three different human beings who were doing the exact same job. They were carving a rock. And there's a passerby who walked by and saw these three men carving a rock. And he stops one and he says to the first one, what are you doing? He said, I'm carving a rock. Can't you see? And the other one, then he stops the other. He says, what are you doing? He says, I'm making a living. As they say in Yiddish, machen a Leben. And then he asks the third person and he says, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a cathedral. Now, they were doing the exact same thing, but it's three perspectives on life. Some people get lost in the nitty-gritty details that are so vital and important, but they get lost in it and they become very robotic. I'm carving a rock, can't you see? The other type of person says, you know what, no, I can see the bigger picture, but I can't see the full, I can see just my scope. I'm making a living. What Judaism demands of us is, as we are engaging in this constant progress, we can't forget that we're building a cathedral. We're building what's called life. We're creating chayim in the plural tense. And that in of itself can give us then that reward of that big picture, gives us this ability to grant confidence in what lies ahead, in the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz.